Today, I'm going to talk about The Acolyte, Episode 5.
Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher.
Episode 5 starts with Osha slowly waking up. She eventually stumbles to where the big fight began and, once again demonstrating the grace and dexterity of Bella Swan from Twilight, a woman who stood to fight a gang who wanted to rape her rather than run a single city block to safety because she didn't think it plausible that she could run that many dozens of feet without tripping. Well, Osha trips over nothing and falls next to the corpse of one of the disposable Jedi. After a while, she gets up, looks around, and finally notices the extremely active lightsaber fight going on 20 feet away. To explain how absurdly slowly this happens, according to timestamps, it took Osha 57 seconds since the time she woke up to notice the lightsaber fight. It's really weird that they apply the rule, if the camera can't see it, the character can't either. In fact, they take this a step further. If the camera can't see it, the character can't hear it either. They only fade in the lightsaber sound effects a moment before Osha looks over. The fight is very fast and extremely energetic, but not easy to follow. I think because the choreography isn't that great. I mean, it's extremely difficult to choreograph a one-on-several fight with without most of the people just standing around and waiting their turn. I suppose if that's the best you can do, it helps to film it confusingly so the audience doesn't notice the people who aren't attacking. Standing around waiting your turn especially makes no sense with lightsabers, which have no weight, so you can't have to recover from an overswing or anything like that, so it'd be especially obvious. That said, I will grant that the colors are pretty. It's about as good as going to a fireworks show. On the one hand, the fireworks show will have a better plot, but on the other hand, you won't get bit by mosquitoes while you're watching this episode. Unless you watch it outside. But that wouldn't be a good idea. This episode is shot so dark that even starlight is probably too much ambient light and everything will wash out. If you watch it in complete darkness, though, it's quite pretty. Anyhow, now that Osha is awake, and the Master kills the rest of the red shirt Jedi in a few seconds, and we're down to our main characters. That's easier on the choreographer, and who knows, maybe the writer took pity on the caterer. When the Master tries to kill Osha for some reason, maybe because she fired a stun blast at him that didn't do anything for some reason, Master Soul suddenly appears to block the Master's lightsaber. He had thrown it, blocked it. Where was Soul when the other Jedi were getting killed? In a competently written story, we'd expect that to be a mystery with an explanation. Here, I think it was just because the only way you can have the cool moment of a character suddenly leaping out of nowhere to block an attack is if they were nowhere until then. Soul then tells Yord to get the civilian back to the ship, which is a weird way to refer to Osha at this point, given that she's on the mission, but whatever. Yord complies and takes Osha and starts heading back to the ship. She tries to plead with Yord that they need to go back and help the Jedi, but Yord says that Soul gave him an order and he'll subdue Osha if he has to, so she relents and goes with him. On their way, Yord says that the Master fights erratically and doesn't follow any rules of combat, explaining why it's hard to fight him. This is a misunderstanding of what rules of combat are. In combat sports, rules of combat are things that you're not allowed to do that keep your opponent safe. In combat, rules of combat are things that you do in order to keep yourself safe. For example, you don't overswing and you return to a guard position after an attack, rather than leaving yourself open. If you don't follow any rules of combat, that means that you're giving your opponent lots of free shots at you. It doesn't make you harder to fight, it makes you easier to kill. Back at the Wookiee's Hobbit hole, Soul's Padawan finds May, and instead of May turning herself in like she had planned to, she fights back. It takes a long time, and far longer than it should take, because the Padawan keeps trying to read May a list of charges against her before putting handcuffs on her. Who convinced her that the Jedi are uniformed police officers? I've got no idea. But it's really stupid. I also have no idea who convinced her that the police read a formal list of charges before handcuffing someone. The police are not that suicidal. Anyway, she eventually does manage to handcuff May, at which point the Master leaves his previous fight with Soul to come here to try to kill May. If you wanted to kill her, why did he take the extra effort of leaving the Wookiee's hobbit hole and go outside to ambush the Jedi instead of waiting for May? Anyway, attacking May results in fighting Soul's Padawan, who lasts much longer against him than a bunch of full Jedi Knights did. I actually don't think, though, that this is any kind of girl power thing. I think it's just the writers needed to slow the pace down, since they're running out of Jedi. Eventually she dies, though not before she elbows the Master in the face twice in a row, and his helmet breaks and falls off. I've heard that the metal the helmet was made of, it's called cortosis, it's from the expanded universe and had the magic power of turning a lightsaber that hit it off for a few seconds. It was known, supposedly, to be extremely fragile. And I mean, okay, fine, but you'd think anything this fragile would be glued to a more durable backing, like the way carbide saw teeth are glued to a steel blade, or automotive safety glasses, layers of glass glued to polyvinyl butyryl, or bulletproof glass is made by gluing safety glass to polycarbonate. I'm pretty sure they have glue in Star Wars. Anyway, the Padawan finally falls down dead, and we see that the Master is Manny. Huh. I really didn't see that one coming. For one thing, it just seemed way too obvious. And I have to admit it, I didn't think they'd cast a male in such an important role. I was wrong. They are willing to telegraph what they're doing this much, and they're not as prejudiced as I thought. Something else was better than expected too, by the way. Manny does get lots of good lines in this episode. When Soul says, in anguish at his Padawan's death, "Jackie," Manny asks, not ungently, "Was that its name?" When Soul says disgustedly, "She was just a child," Manny shrugs and replies, "You brought her here." He then throws his cloak at Soul and force pulls May to him, where he grabs her by the throat. And he asks her, "You really didn't know it was me?" He's holding it like this. "You really didn't know it was me? Not even deep down." Soul, having gotten rid of the cloak over his face, attacks Manny, and he defends himself without letting go of May. He then says, "You attacked me while my back was turned? Not very Jedi of you." Well, the delivery is great. Manny Jacinto is the man. This line isn't very good. Not attacking someone while his back is turned only applies outside of fights. The reason why is that a person whose back is turned, before the fight has started, doesn't know to defend himself. In the middle of a fight, he certainly knows to defend himself. And if he chooses not to, that's on him. Fighting honorably does not require that you refrain from taking advantage of your opponent's mistakes during the fight. At a bare technical level, the only possible way to defeat your opponent is to attack where he isn't defending. That's often only an inch or two away from where he is defending, but in a strict sense, if your attack succeeds, you were attacking where he was defenseless. The whole point of sword fighting is to get your opponent to not defend some small, vulnerable area, and then attack him in it. It's not the act of attacking an undefended spot which is dishonorable, it's the act of attacking someone who doesn't know that you're fighting him. If you attack someone else in the middle of a fight with a man, that does not morally obligate him to stop fighting you. You don't get to just pause fights like they're a video game. Anyway, Manny then turns off his lightsaber and holds it up to May's head, much like you'd hold a gun to someone's head. Seems a little unnecessary. You could just hold the blade next to her. Whatever. Maybe it saves power this way. Anyway, so he seems to be threatening Soul that he'll kill May, which Soul seems to take as a threat because he doesn't want May to get hurt. It's been likened to the scene in Blazing Saddles where the sheriff takes himself hostage and the townfolk who wanted to hang him back off. But to be fair, they did establish before that Soul wants to take May alive because there's still good in her or something. I mean, episode 3 made it seem like there was never any good in her, but whatever. Sol throws his lightsaber away, which would be a bigger deal for someone who can't just use the Force to get it back in a second, but whatever. Maybe the writers forgot about that. He asks Manny, "What are you?" And Manny replies, "I have no name, but Jedi like you might call me Sith." When Sol asks what he wants, he replies, "Freedom. The freedom to wield my power how I like without having to answer to Jedi like you." This is interesting, because Manny is a villain like Iago from Shakespeare's play Othello. He's not on the same level, obviously, but he is of the same kind. A villain who knows that he's a villain. Iago is one of the all-time great villains. He's a great moral philosopher and explains in detail why what he's doing is wicked. Sometimes to himself, sometimes to the audience, sometimes to other characters. Manny doesn't rise to this level, but he has far more moral clarity than anyone else in this show. He even explains that everyone has to die because, according to the Jedi, he's not allowed to exist. So to exist, he must kill everyone who knows of his existence. He doesn't say this to justify his actions, only to show cause and effect. You can even detect his appreciation of the irony of the hazards of unintended consequences. He does not will the good, and has absolutely no remorse about killing, but if the Jedi didn't mean to stop him, there are several Jedi he probably wouldn't have killed because he didn't care about them otherwise. At this point, Osha and Yord show up, because Osha got the idea to use light to attract the giant flying beetles, and use this as a weapon against Manny, and somehow Yord stopped trying to follow his orders. Because he's an idiot. And I don't just mean that disobeying his orders is stupid. It is. But the plan to attack a Sith who's just killed a half dozen Jedi with ease, using a flashlight and some big bugs, which we've already seen can be killed with a lightsaber in a single strike, is really stupid. Yord surprises Manny and fights him briefly. He picked up one of the broken pieces of Manny's helmet, and Yord uses it to neutralize Manny's saber right after Manny used his arm bracelet to neutralize Yord's saber. Unfortunately for Yord, Manny is much better at unarmed combat than Yord is, and after a brief exchange, he snaps Yord's neck. I will say, I was not expecting Yord and Sol's Padawan to be killed in this fight, but it was a pleasant surprise, because they were two of the most annoying characters in the show. No shade to the actors, they didn't write the script, but I can't see how this isn't an improvement. It's like in The Last Jedi, when Kylo Ren smashed his helmet and started speaking intelligibly. Osha then uses her stun gun to stun May. Meanwhile, Sol and Manny fight unarmed, and curiously, Sol has the upper hand, for once. And admittedly, he does seem to be angry, and Jedi who are angry seem to do a lot better. But anyway, after more fighting, Sol has Manny immobilized, and is about to chop his head off with a lightsaber. Manny then notices Osha and asks her why she trusts Sol after all he's done to her. When Sol says that Manny's mind has been twisted by darkness, Manny replies, "I've accepted my darkness. What have you done with yours?" And I've got to say, this is some pretty good manipulation by Manny. It's terrible philosophy, but I don't think Manny means it to be good philosophy. His goal is to plant seeds of doubt in Osha's mind, not to logically persuade anyone. Sol backs up, and when he's about to kill Manny, I think he backs up to get room to swing, Osha calls his name. Sol! Sol thinks a bit and then says, "The Jedi do not attack the unarmed." And once again, this is gibbering idiocy. It's one thing to not start a fight with someone who doesn't have a weapon, though a man with hands always has a weapon, since you can kill with your bare hands. But in any event, it's one thing to not start a fight. It's another to let someone get away with hurting people because he's doing it without a weapon. And it's still another thing to stop fighting the moment that you manage to temporarily disarm your opponent, but he's not done fighting you. Especially if his primary weapon is magic powers, which he still very much has, even if for some reason he forgets to use them so far. Because the writers don't care? Anyway, Manny has an interesting line here. He has an interesting line. Rules, rules, rules. If you never follow them, you never have to break them. And after this, he retrieves his lightsaber with the Force. And at this point, Osha turns on a flashlight she's carrying and attaches it to Manny's back. Somehow. Maybe she noticed a decorative Velcro strip on the back of his costume. Anyway, he flails around ridiculously, pretending that he can't get the large, motionless item off his back. Should be freaking easy. And the giant beetles, who are attracted to lightsaber light during the day, but not at night, then swoop down, because he's got the flashlight on him, and carry him off, presumably to eat him? This is morally fine, while finishing him off with Saul's lightsaber would have been evil. Apparently. I don't know. I've been saying that the writers are stupid all along, so they are. And that's not even getting into why these bugs carrying Manny into the air is supposed to finish him off. We've seen that it only takes a single lightsaber strike to cut them in half. Even if they somehow manage to grab his arms, he can still use the Force to swing his saber around. Why is this supposed to kill him? Did the writers just abandon him? Which is why he couldn't get the flashlight off his back, despite that being obviously easy? Oh, speaking of the writers being idiots, Osha then asks Sol why Manny said that she shouldn't trust Sol, because the evil guy who doesn't believe in good is definitely the person to take advice from on who to trust. Sol looks guilty as hell and says, "Please, Osha, I'll explain." Then May Force pulls the stun gun and stuns Sol with it, who doesn't bother to block with his lightsaber because the Force only works when it would be convenient for the writers. The sisters talk to May, and May takes no responsibility for anything, as one would expect from a cruel psychopath, which is what she's always been shown to be. Incidentally, somehow the two sisters talking to each other looks bad in spite of modern technology. So you'd think we've come a ways from having to use split screen for an actor to play two people talking to each other. And we have, but it still looks really bad for some reason. Anyway, when Osha points out that May tried to kill her and she'd be dead if it weren't for the Jedi, May concludes that the Jedi have brainwashed Osha. Now I'm not sure that May is a psychopath. She might just be severely schizophrenic. Of course, she could be both. Anyway, Osha tries to arrest May because she's a cop now? And May Force pushes Osha off a small-ish cliff, and then comments to her comatose sister, "You never could block." Then she gives herself a lightsaber haircut so her hair matches Osha's hair. She steals Osha's clothes, then leaves her sister to die in the forest as she goes off to find Sol and impersonate Osha. She sure loves her sister. Sol accepts May's impersonation for some reason. Maybe he's still groggy from just waking up from being stunned. As Sol and May head for their ship, someplace else various bug parts fall from the sky, then Manny descends and extinguishes his lightsaber. After picking up his helmet and cloak, he walks over to Osha, who's still unconscious, lying on her side in only her tank top and the tights she'd worn under her pants. Clearly visible is the tattoo on her arm that Sol noticed in the first episode. I forget if I mentioned it. It wasn't important at the time. Guess it turns out to be. Manny gently turns her on her back with the Force, then says, "What extraordinary beings we are. Even in the revelation of our triumph, you see the depth of our despair." He then gently lays his cloak on top of her, and we go to credits. I really have to give Manny Jacinto credit here, because he makes the whole thing seem plausible, despite it making precisely no sense. Why does he roll her onto her back? Is that supposed to be more comfortable? But maybe she's a side sleeper for all he knows. Why does he lovingly cover her with his cloak? He had already tried to kill her once or twice, and she's seen his face. I mean, maybe this is setting up, trying to turn her to the dark side? Not too long ago, he sowed seeds of doubt about Sol, which she believed, but that seems a bit of a stretch, even for someone as charismatic as Manny, with someone as directionless as Osha. But even if that's going on, what on earth were the words he said supposed to mean? even in the revelation of our triumph? No one triumphed here. There are only various degrees of having failed. If someone triumphed, that sure wasn't revealed. And what about, you see the depth of our despair? Despair is choosing to not hope. Who's given up hope? Who's despairing? Manny seems to be in good spirits, and if she's even alive, Osha is unconscious, so she's neither hoping nor despairing. If he's referring to someone else, May or Sol, most everyone else is dead, I don't see how either of them is despairing. I think that the thing he was supposed to say is that even in what seems like triumph, tragedy can still touch us. You know, one of those observations that it's possible to win in some ways and lose in others, that you can achieve your goals and have things turn out worse than if you hadn't. But the writers ran into the problem that they're incompetent. And originality is a bad idea if you're incompetent. If you're incompetent, steal as much as possible. You'll produce better results. So we've got another case of when it's distilled, its effects don't last long. They're just not good at putting words in order. There's not much else to say in this episode. It suffers, as the previous 4 did, from being a suspense thriller. I've heard that called a mystery box show. So very little actually happens, and it's all hinting about what might happen, or in a more technical sense, what we may eventually find out has happened that we only saw hints of. Now, I don't generally like the suspense thriller genre, so I'm not the best person to evaluate this, but even allowing for that, there is a reason why very few episodic shows are suspense thrillers. It's hard to enjoy very little happening for that long. Though, to be fair to The Acolyte, it feels like it wasn't originally supposed to be an episodic show. It feels a lot more like it was meant to be a 5-act movie which was turned into an 8-episode show by breaking some of the acts up into multiple episodes and by adding filler, mostly in the form of people walking around slowly, or taking a long time to say their lines. Well, whatever. We'll eventually find out what, if anything, was supposed to have happened. I hope. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.